Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Closing arguments were made on Tuesday at the Lethbridge courthouse as the trial of the Coutts 2 is slowly wrapping up. So who's to blame for the Jasper wildfires? Is it Ottawa and Parks Canada? Political reporter Brian Lilly will give us his thoughts. And thousands have taken to the streets in Venezuela protesting the recent election results, which gave Nicolas Maduro another 6-year term.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Closing arguments were heard today involving the Coutts 2. Lawyers for the Crown and for the two defendants, Chris Carbert and Anthony Olenek, had their final say at the Lethbridge courthouse. The two were charged with conspiring to commit murder of RCMP officers. BCN's Landon Hickok has been covering this story and has more. Landon.
Today, we saw closing arguments in the trial of Anthony Olenek and Chris Carbert, who are on charges of conspiring to murder police officers in the Coutts border blockade of winter 2022, as well as possession of firearms dangerous to the public and mischief. Now, today, we saw both the defense lawyers of Olenek and Carbert and the Crown give their testimonies. Both defense lawyers tell the jury that there is simply a lack of evidence that the two men conspired to murder police officers, as well as any other co-conspirators at the Coutts border blockade, including Chris Lysak and the Morin brothers. Now, despite this, the Crown did bring up texts of Olenek and Carbert between themselves or with other people or in larger group chats with other co-conspirators, claiming their views about the government and their preparedness, as well as even a possible plan of societal restructuring. Now, Catherine Bayak, who's Chris Carbert's defense lawyer, told the jury that Chris Carbert can be found guilty of mischief in his role of the Coutts border blockade, but there is no substantial evidence that he had any sort of plan to harm RCMP officers if they were to take action, and that he was just preparing for if worse comes to worse in the event of governmental crackdown and civil unrest. Today, we saw the courtroom packed with supporters of Olenek and Carbert, and as we reach the end of closing arguments, Wednesday we will see Justice Lebrens give his charge to the jury, and the jury will then retire and then debrief before they finally give their final verdicts of the two men, and we'll see this trial come to a close. Hal?
Thanks so much, Landon. That was BCN's Landon Hickok covering the Coutts 2 trial here in Lethbridge. As you've heard on Bridge City News, the Hells Angels opened a clubhouse here in Lethbridge. A spokesperson for Alert says it is deeply concerning that the outlaw motorcycle gang is continuing to expand its presence here in Alberta. Mike Tucker says it is very important not to show support for a group which is known worldwide of being a dangerous criminal organization.
Citizens who are speaking up to educate themselves and learn a little bit more about who they're choosing to support, because this is a criminal organization. You know, they are going to see the Death Head logo, and really those cuts and that logo is used as a tool for intimidation in that community. This would be an attempt for the Hells Angels to exert some control over that Lethbridge market. It's valuable territory for them to conduct their geographic reach and conduct criminal opportunities. The Hells Angels in Alberta have been heavily involved in drug trafficking. Thankfully, we have a dedicated alert team that works in Lethbridge specific to organized crime investigations. And we're going to work hand in hand with the Lethbridge Police Service. Hells Angels, organized crime always has a place in pop culture, and it's always going to be glamorized to a certain degree. But this isn't movies, this isn't television shows, this is real life, and there's real consequences, and it impacts their community.
The Hells Angels began in California back in 1948 and now have over 6,000 members in 59 countries around the world. It appears as though not many want to participate in the federal government's gun buyback program. Canada Post said they cannot make it work, and the RCMP have allegedly had serious issues with it. Now, when it comes to legal firearms owned by farmers and ranchers wanting to protect themselves, Mike McCauley with the RCMP Community Safety and Wellbeing Branch says gun owners need to be very careful in rural communities.
We understand Albertans have a right to firearms, and we don't want to get in the way of that, but we do ask Albertans to lock those up. Unfortunately, there's a lot of crime guns that are stolen from good, hardworking rural Albertans, that have guns for proper purposes, but they get stolen because they don't necessarily lock them up properly.
Make sure you catch the entire interview with Mike McCauley from the Alberta RCMP and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. We continue to see the devastating images of the wildfire felt by Jasper and Jasper National Park. Now, who's to blame? Is the pine beetles, the federal or the provincial government? Political columnist Brian Lilly offered his thoughts.
You've got people who are saying, see, this is proof, this is climate change, this is why we have to act. Well, acting would include good forest management practices, which apparently Parks Canada was not about. And guess what? The area around Jasper, I've got people saying to me, Hal, no, the town of Jasper is a municipality, and therefore the province has responsibility. Well, the area around Jasper is called a national park, and Parks Canada is responsible for the forestry management. They are responsible for fighting the forest fires within the national park.
Mr. Lilly will have more on the Jasper wildfires coming up later in our broadcast. The mayor of Jasper is defending Parks Canada against critics who claim the federal agency did not do enough to clear trees that were killed by mountain pine beetles, which critics say were a fire hazard. Richard Ireland says the impact of the mountain pine beetle was so widespread in the park that removing all of the dead trees would have been nearly impossible. He says the town and Parks Canada were aware of the risks and took steps to prepare the town against them, such as becoming one of Canada's first fire-smart communities. More than 20,000 people were forced to evacuate a week ago because of the fires, which torched around 30% of the town's buildings. King Charles and Queen Camilla say they are immensely saddened by the damage the wildfires caused to Jasper National Park. The British monarch expressed sympathy with those affected by the devastation and called the tourist town a truly magical place. Charles also thanked emergency responders and community volunteers who've been battling the blazes. It appears as though efforts by our firefighters and cooler wet weather is helping to put out some of the blazes. Alberta Wildfires says there are currently 117 wildfires burning here in the province. That's a decrease of around 20 wildfires over the past 72 hours. The most are still located in the Peace River Forest area, where 18 wildfires are still burning. Meanwhile, in British Columbia, there are currently 349 active wildfires, with 6 starting in the last 24 hours. Out of all of the blazes, 159 wildfires are still considered out of control. More than 1,500 firefighting personnel are currently battling the wildfires in British Columbia. More rain is desperately needed, not only in Alberta, but of course in British Columbia. Some areas of southwestern Alberta saw a few light showers. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, any moisture is greatly appreciated right now.
Well, that's for sure, Hal, especially considering how warm and dry the rest of the week is going to be. We could see that little bit of relief both tonight, overnight there. So we are seeing that slight chance of showers this evening. We could see a risk of a thunderstorm as well, along with some 30 to 50K winds from the west. Those winds continuing on into Wednesday, but Wednesday we should see that sky clearing up, high of 30 degrees. And that's the first of many 30-degree days. In fact, as we get into that long weekend, we're going to see some of those days in the mid to high 30s. And I'll be back later in the show to give you all those details.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. There is still hope among the Venezuelan people as they're peacefully gathering at the United Nations in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. They're demanding that the National Electoral Council show the true results of the presidential election between Nicolas Maduro and Edmundo Gonzalez. The Venezuelan people have been protesting the results since Sunday. In exclusive video content sent to Bridge City News, we've seen here Venezuelans calling for a free Venezuela. Other videos sent to us also show how the paramilitary organization of the Maduro government allegedly shot at people who were protesting in the streets. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer was jeered in Southport, England, as he tried to pay respects for the children and adults killed and wounded in a mass stabbing attack. 3 kids, all under the age of 10, were participating in a dance and yoga class when the attack occurred on Monday. 8 children and 2 adults are still in hospital, most in critical condition. One person yelled at Starmer for not doing enough to deal with the recent rise in knife crime. Israel has vowed to retaliate following the attack by the terrorist group Hezbollah on a soccer field in Israel, which left 12 children dead. According to TPN Israel correspondent Yair Pinto, Iran says there will be dire consequences for the Israel Defense Forces should it decide to attack Lebanon, where the attack against the Israeli children originated from.
The Iranian Foreign Ministry issued a statement that would warn Israel against a new adventure against Lebanon under the pretext of the incident in Majd al-Shams. Israel bears the main responsibility for unexpected reactions to any stupid behavior it may commit. As previously reported, 12 Israeli children were murdered on Saturday evening when a rocket fired by the Iranian-backed Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah struck a soccer field in the Druze village of Majd al-Shams in the Golan Heights, in the north of Israel. Hezbollah appears to have been surprised that this rocket caused so much death and damage, and they're trying to deny the responsibility for it. The terrorist group, which has fired nearly 5,500 rockets, missiles, and UAVs into Israel over the past 9 months, issued an absurd statement that this one wasn't one of theirs, but rather an Israeli Iron Dome rocket that went off course.
Palestinians returned to what was left of their homes and shelters in Gaza's southern city of Khan Yunis on Tuesday. This follows a week-long ground assault by the Israeli military battling Hamas on the eastern parts of the city.
قالوا لنا في انسحاب من بنسيلة، اجت زي ما انت شايفه فيش لا خيمه، المأوى الاخير كان لي بعض الاغراض اللي قدرنا ننتشلهم من البيت الان انتهى. انا الان انا وزوجتي وابني واخواني مشردين الوضع سيء جسديا انهرنا، نفسيا انهرنا، مكفي لو قرار الحرب والسلم بايدينا لاخترنا السلم للابد. الوضع سيء، مش قادر اوصف كميه القهر الموجوده داخلنا.
The Blood Tribe recently honored a handful of individuals in recognition of their advocacy and contributions to our community. Former boxer Max Gibb, retired warrant officer Glenn Miller, and former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney were all honored. They were presented with a special headdress transfer ceremony, which appoints them as Guyana honorary chiefs.
Well, it's a very rare honor and very high honor to be recognized, to be inducted into and be asked to be inducted into the Kainai chieftainship. Each chief brings a vast diversity of knowledge and experience that can help advocate for the Blood Tribe here and abroad.
The inductees were painted with ochre and an eagle bonnet was placed on their heads. They were given traditional Blackfoot names, which will be recognized in the Blackfoot community. Officials say only 40 living members at a time may be named as honorary chiefs.
This goes way back since 1918. They were recognizing, trying to have help from other people other than themselves who could help influence and advocate on behalf of the Blood Tribe. And that's what we continue to do over 100 years later.
The ceremony took place late Monday at the Sundance grounds located just outside of Standoff. A real concern for many pedestrians here in our city is how many people ride their bicycles on our sidewalks. Sometimes those on their bikes force pedestrians, including those who are walking their dogs off the sidewalks and onto people's lawns, or even worse, onto the street. An official with the city of Lethbridge explains what the bylaw says in regards to bikes and e-scooters on sidewalks.
So the current bylaw does not allow anyone over the age of 12 to ride on a sidewalk unless they're accompanying someone under the age of 12. So the idea is that adults should be riding on the road or using dedicated bike lanes or multi-use pathways. So the e-scooter is provided by Bird, which is a permitted scooter company within the city. Those ones there do have permission to ride on sidewalks and multi-use pathways and the road. When passing pedestrians, they are required to yield to pedestrians and to notify pedestrians that they're passing, either by using the onboard bell or through a verbal notification to pedestrians that they'll be passing them.
As for skateboards and longboards, St. Amant says there is more of a gray area there since they're not regulated under any of the City of Lethbridge bylaws. The name of an iconic product developed right here in Lethbridge will remain on the marquee of the city's premier baseball facility. Spitz Stadium, home of the Lethbridge Bulls, has a new 5-year, $250,000 sponsorship agreement, which was signed July 30th with the founder of Spitz International. Tom Droog signed the original sponsorship agreement back in 2008 when the then Henderson Stadium was renamed Spitz Stadium. Droog, now president of T&E Ventures, eventually sold the Spitz company to PepsiCo, but he still takes great pride in having the name associated with baseball here in Lethbridge.
Spitz Stadium is the name, and I'm always kind of smiling when I drive through it and you see the name Spitz Stadium. It's still our dream. When I fly from Ontario to here, I whistle. I'm still a Western boy, and that is the way I say thank you to the people of Lethbridge and the surrounding area, and for supporting us in the beginning with the Spitz.
The success story of Spitz is a tremendous local Southern Alberta story. As that relationship grew over the years, he came up with the idea, well, why don't we put the name on the stadium? And that took a little bit of finagling and getting done, but we persevered and got that done, and he's been a tremendous friend to the stadium and the teams ever since. I would like to announce that in addition to the Spitz sponsorship of the stadium, he's also committed to a 10-year, $10,000 a year sponsorship of our Bulls affiliate team, the Lethbridge Longhorns, the high school team here in Lethbridge. And it just goes to show his passion for the baseball community here in the city and his continued commitment to it.
That is great news. And the Spitz Stadium agreement with Droog also includes a $10,000 allocation for new signage for the facility. You know, we've had some decent weather here lately for a ball game. We've had sunshine mixed with clouds in most regions here in southwestern Alberta. As for how the rest of the week is shaping up, well, the full weather details coming up after the break. Well, we had kind of a mixed bag today here in southwestern Alberta. Some sunshine, clouds, and even spotty showers at times. Jeanette Roche is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it's been quite dry lately, however. The lawns and coulees are a lot more brown than green right now. Any chance of more moisture anytime soon?
Well, we could see some potential showers tonight, Hal. Just a slight chance, though, along with the risk of a thunderstorm. So enjoy that because we are in for some warm, dry days ahead of us here. Mainly clear skies for most of the week and then back up to those 30s. So 30 degrees expected tomorrow on Wednesday, up to 33 on Thursday, 32 Friday. And then there we go. There's that mid to high 30s day. 36 degrees is what Saturday is coming in at. And then down to 33 on Sunday, and then rounding out that long weekend, holiday Monday, 32 degrees. So it's going to be a hot one. So hopefully you are planning something near some water or up in the mountains somewhere where it's a little bit cooler. So the average high for this time of year, 26 degrees, average low 11:35. That was our hot day. That was the record breaker. That happened back in 1939 on this day. And on this day back in 1954, we had the coldest on record, which was only 6 degrees. Okay, sun rose exactly at 6 o'clock this morning. Look at that. And then 9:14 is when the sun is setting. So that means we have a 15-hour and 14-minute day of daylight, 3 minutes less daylight than we saw yesterday. Okay, a little bit of a drizzly one on the west coast tomorrow. So both Vancouver and Victoria seeing 30% chance of early morning showers. 22 in Victoria, could be more like 17 where the onshore winds blow. 24 for a high in Vancouver. 28 the expected high tomorrow in Edmonton. 60% chance of late day showers. Clear skies expected in Calgary, along with 30 degrees. As we get to the rest of the prairies, we're also seeing mainly clear skies amongst about most of these cities here, and also very high temperatures. 30 degrees in Saskatoon, same for Regina. Winnipeg sitting at 29. Winnipeg could see a 30% chance of showers. Also that risk of thunderstorms there. Now as we get into the central part of the country, let's move on over here. So Toronto sitting at 30 degrees, mix of sun and cloud. Ottawa expecting quite a bit of rain tomorrow, 20 to 30 millimeters. Could see a risk of a thunderstorm as well, 26 for a high. Now parts of Quebec are still under that extended heat wave, with the exception of Wednesday. We could see a little bit of relief from that because of the showers, and then the hot temperatures will resume again Thursday and Friday, bringing humidex values of up to 40. But we are seeing those showers along with thunderstorms tomorrow in Montreal, and only that high of 23 before we get back up to the very warm temperatures there. Speaking of warm temperatures, out on the east coast, Fredericton 29, clear skies. A beautiful day in Halifax tomorrow as well, 25 for the high. 28 expected in Charlottetown and also in St. John's. Now St. John's could also see some rain, some fog, and a lot of wind, up to 60k winds there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Microsoft says it is experiencing technical difficulties with some of its services. This is only 10 days after the tech giant experienced worldwide issues over a routine software update. It says it is looking into access issues and degraded performance within its Microsoft 365 services and features. Company officials say the impacts of these issues were felt by users in Canada, the United States, and around the world. It says Canadian users reported a spike in login, Outlook, and website issues to downdetector.ca. A recent study finds data breaches cost Canadian organizations on average $6.32 million to resolve. The new report by IBM analyzed breaches experienced by 604 groups worldwide between March of last year and February of this year. Canada had the sixth highest costs out of the 16 countries studied, coming in just behind the United States, Germany, and Italy. Financial services were the hardest hit, with an average cost hitting $9.28 million. George Weston says a recent settlement involving bread price-fixing class actions against it delivered a $253 million hit to the company's second quarter net earnings. The company says net earnings for the quarter ending June 15th were $667 million. Now that is down from $783 million last year. More than $13 billion of the $14 billion in second quarter revenue came from Loblaw, in which George Weston owns a majority stake. The bread-fixing class action cases accused Weston and Loblaw of conspiring to fix the price of packaged bread here in Canada. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 45 points on the day to finish at 22,824. The Dow was up 203 points to 40,743. The S&P 500 was down 27 on the day to 5436, and the Nasdaq was up 222 points to 17,147. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 50 cents to 75.31 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 7 cents to 2.11 US. Gold was up 29.62 on the day to 24.0747 US an ounce, and silver was down 35 cents to 27.60 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $7.57 per bushel, barley's at $5.79, canola's at $13.92, and corn is at $7.19 per bushel. Live cattle August contract was down $1.53 to $179.98. Feeder cattle August contract was up 55 cents to $256.98, and lean hogs were down 25 cents to $91.20. That's for the August contract as well. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 72.20 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, final arguments were heard today in the trial of the two men accused of conspiring to commit murder of police officers at the Coutts border blockade back in 2022. Jurors have been hearing evidence for 7 weeks in the case against Chris Carbert and Anthony Olenek. Both men were charged after guns, body armor, and ammunition were found in trailers at Coutts. The blockade tied up traffic for 2 weeks at the Canada-US border to protest COVID-19 rules and vaccine mandates. The new polls are out showing the federal Conservatives still have a commanding lead over the Trudeau Liberals. Sun political columnist Brian Lilley will share details with us momentarily. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. The Jasper wildfire and all of the damage sustained by the town and national park has become a bit of a jurisdictional battle. Some say it's all about bad forest management, while other people are blaming climate change. Now, to chat about this in more detail is Sun political columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, who's really at fault here for the Jasper wildfires? Perhaps it's even the pine beetles.
Pine beetles, an act of God, the temperature, the state of the forest. There's a lot going on here. I find it really disturbing that immediately after this horrific fire, you had people coming out and saying, well, it's because Danielle Smith doesn't believe in climate change. That's why this happened. Can we at least take a beat after the fire, after all the devastation? No, apparently not. And so you've got people are saying, see, this is proof, this is climate change, this is why we have to act. Well, acting would include good forest management practices, which apparently Parks Canada was not about. And guess what? The area around Jasper, I've got people saying to me, Hal, no, the town of Jasper is a municipality, and therefore the the province has responsibility. Well, the area around Jasper is called a national park. And Parks Canada is responsible for the forestry management. They are responsible for fighting the forest fires within the national park. They have failed to do their job. And my colleague, Lauren Gunter, up in Edmonton, he has documented this very well. The fight going back years on the way that Parks Canada manage Jasper National Park, manages Banff, manages all the areas that they're responsible for. So if this is due to climate change, well, then reacting to climate change would require you to do mitigation efforts. Instead, it appears that Parks Canada decided to follow the same route as other jurisdictions like California and not clearing away dry, dead timber that was just sitting there waiting for a spark. So am I saying that this whole ordeal could have been avoided? No, forest fires are normal. Forest fires are natural. With or without climate change, they have been happening since time began. But what have we done? We have learned how to manage them. And that does not mean just letting things go their natural course. That's not managing. That's letting forest fires get out of control. So I think there's going to have to be a real reckoning and an accounting of who knew what when, who acted, who failed to act. The federal government is responsible for large parts of Alberta's wilderness. And I think there will be a push by some to say that needs to change.
And fortunately, thanks to the efforts of our first responders, our firefighters, Brian, 70% of Jasper was saved, the town of Jasper. So very thankful for that. Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is still on vacation in Tofino, British Columbia. He was recently ambushed by an independent journalist on the beach. And one of the questions asked was if Trudeau was looking to possibly replace himself as Liberal leader. What did Trudeau have to say?
He said no. It was an interesting interview in a couple of ways. Cian Bexley, the independent journalist who shows up on a beach looking for him, found him. It looked like Trudeau's security was just going to do away with him, chase him away. And Trudeau said, no, come here. I think he realized what the optics would look like and decided to answer his questions. And when asked, are you looking for a replacement? He said, no. Well, are you worried about your polling? He said, no. Well, why aren't you worried about your polling? He said, because I speak to Canadians all the time. I'm not sure which Canadians he's speaking to, Hal, because the polling is quite clear. The Liberals, they're not at their lowest point, but when you're at 23, 24% in the polls, you're not doing very well. And outside of certain portions of Quebec and, say, downtown Toronto, the Liberals are in real trouble straight across the country. They should be worried about the polls. They should be worried about where things are going, and they should be thinking about changing leaders. But I've been mostly in the camp that Justin Trudeau's not going anywhere. I'm firmly in that camp now.
And what are the recent polls telling us right now in regards to the lead by the federal Conservatives?
The Conservatives are ahead, according to Nanos, by just over 15 points. They're ahead, according to Abacus, by 19 points. Leger, they'll be coming out with another poll shortly. It's going to show a large lead, as they have been for a while. I mean, it has been, I would say, since sometime last fall was when we got into the serious and repetitive double-digit leads. Remember, up until the end of May 2023, the parties were still pretty close. Every once in a while, the Liberals might even be tied or even in the lead by a point or two. But from the end of May 2023 on, the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre have been building a steady lead. And for the last 6 months or more, it has been in that 15 to 22 point range. So that's a massive lead. That's a massive majority. And those are the kinds of numbers that any leader should be looking at and saying, can I turn it around? Perhaps Justin Trudeau thinks he can, and perhaps he's looked at the list of contenders, the list of possible replacements, and said, well, maybe we'll lose, but I'll still do better than all of these guys.
A pair of by-elections have been called for September 16th, the day that Parliament resumes, Brian. One is a seat in Winnipeg, which is held by the NDP, and the other in Montreal, held by the Liberals. Any chance that Conservatives can swoop in and grab both like they did in a Toronto riding recently?
They have no chance of doing that in the Montreal riding. I believe it's La Salle et Marde Verdun. The riding boundaries have moved a little bit, but this was David Lameddy's riding, the former justice minister who left, and just like many people who leave Justin Trudeau's cabinet or caucus, doesn't have nice things to say about his former boss. Before that, years ago, it was held by Paul Martin. The NDP held it from 2011 until 2015, during that orange wave that Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair were able to orchestrate throughout much of Quebec. They held it then. And right now, the Liberals have a local councillor running. The NDP have had a local councillor running for some time, quite a popular guy. There's a strong chance that the NDP could take that seat. Now, in the Winnipeg by-election, that's, I believe it's Elmwood Transcona, that's an NDP riding right now that could go to the Conservatives. So the Conservatives could take one, the NDP could lose one, but pick up the other. The Conservatives have nominated a candidate who is a member of the local International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. He's active in the union. He's a contractor. The NDP has nominated someone who's head of the local business association. So it's kind of a bizarre world that we're operating in there. But those are the candidates, and interesting timing for this. People will be voting the day that Parliament is scheduled to return for the fall sitting.
Brian, the federal government announced that the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force will keep an eye on all future by-elections, including the two we just chatted about coming up in September. What specifically will they be keeping an eye on? Maybe foreign interference, perhaps?
I think that's going to be a major issue, is foreign interference at play. And you might think, well, what do foreign countries care about a by-election? Well, trying to get your candidate or someone who is in line with you is part of what foreign countries do, whether we're talking India or China. Those are the two main players. Any attempts that Russia has to interfere in Canada is mainly just about discrediting democracy and institutions. They're not looking to install somebody, but India does want to have candidates that are in line with them when it comes to issues like Punjabi independence, the Khalistan movement. China, on a whole bunch of fronts, wants to install their own people. And so we need to be aware of that and be looking. There was an Elections Canada report out recently that recommended something, Hal, that I would have been against a little while ago. And now I'm fully in favor of it. And that's that there need to be rules around nomination meetings. Don Valley West nomination in Toronto with Han Dong, that riding was going to go to the Liberals. China didn't interfere in the election. They interfered in the nomination process. So I think that we need to go further than just monitoring by-elections. I think that, much like in the United States, there are rules around primaries and caucuses where people select the presidential candidate. We need rules around nominations, because that's where the interference is going to take place. And in my view, if you're not legally allowed to vote in an election in Canada, you shouldn't be allowed to vote in a nomination race. So, you don't have 14-year-old Chinese nationals who are going to a boarding school in Toronto helping pick the candidate who's going to win the riding for the Liberal Party next time. Right now, the parties, the NDP and the Liberals allow you to vote at 14 in a nomination race, and the Conservatives at 16, and you don't even have to be a citizen. I think all that has to change.
Brian, you reported on a national poll that showed 60% of Canadians feel there are too many immigrants being allowed into Canada. Now, a report from the federal government's own focus group showed 100% of people disagree with the government's immigration policy.
I mean, what a mess. The immigration poll was done by Leger for an organization at McGill University called the Association of Canadian Studies. And they've been tracking views around immigration for some time. I went back just 5 years in their polling, Hal. In 2019, they asked the same question. Are we admitting too many, too few, or just about the right amount? In 2019, 49% of the population said we are letting in just about the right amount. And I think it was 12% said not enough. Only 35% said we're letting in too many people. Fast forward 2024, 60% say too many people. And the number who think that we're letting in too few is down to just 3%. That is a massive sea change. And then for the Privy Council office to do a focus group and not be able to find anybody that thinks they're doing a good job on immigration, that should be telling to the government. But I was speaking with one Liberal just the other day, Hal, and he said, I don't know what's wrong with my party. We tend to double down on bad moves. Instead of admitting that we make a mistake and we're going to course correct, they just double down and they try to explain it louder. It's like, finding out somebody can't hear you or doesn't understand you, so you just yell it at them. That's what they're doing right now.
The Trudeau government's commitment to bring in around 5,000 people from Gaza into Canada, Brian, has many people concerned, including American senators. Can you explain?
Yeah, it should have lots of people concerned for various reasons. I remember when I was in Israel, having dinner, a group of us with this gentleman who used to be an officer in the IDF, and when he found out it was going to be 1,000, he was shocked. Never mind 5,000. So Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Tom Coutts, and some others, they've written to Joe Biden's Secretary of Homeland Security and said, we need to start paying attention to the northern border. And they point out in the letter that more than 230 suspected terrorists had been caught up until that point so far in 2024. That's more than an entire year's in some past years. Going back to 2019 and such, you wouldn't even have that many in a year. Now you've got that many in the first 6 months, more than one a day. They're very concerned about that. And then they're saying now our neighbor on the longest undefended border, they're going to bring in 5,000 people from a war-torn region ruled by a terrorist organization where we know that the vast majority support what Hamas did on October 7th. How are we making sure that we're secure? Mark Miller, Trudeau's immigration minister, he was completely dismissive of it. I had written, before he came out and commented on it, I had written and said, we need to take this issue that the Americans have seriously. The border is a very sensitive issue in the United States. After 9/11, you will remember that there were repeated claims. And I think at one point, even Hillary Clinton, while she was U.S. Senator, made the claim that people who had carried out 9/11 came across the Canadian border. And there were lots of calls to effectively seal it. That didn't happen, in part because Jean Chrétien took the concerns of the Americans seriously. He sent his then Foreign Affairs Minister, John Manley, down to Washington. He was there on a regular basis to work with the Americans, to make sure that they felt comfortable. And yes, some things became more difficult to cross at the border, but it wasn't, to use the term he used at the time, it wasn't as thick. The border didn't become as thick as the Americans wanted it to. If we're not careful, we will end up with a thick, difficult to cross border.
Brian, Stats Canada's come out with the latest crime statistics recently, and Tory leader Pierre Poilievre says crime is out of control in Canada. But what does the data really show here?
The data shows that since Justin Trudeau took office, you've got stats like extortion up by 357%. I know that's an issue in Alberta, in particular among the Indo-Canadian community, who are being targeted by boiler rooms operating in India. They're targeting Indo-Canadians in this country with extortion, calling them, making threats. That's a huge issue. That's not the only part of the extortion threat growing, but that's part of it. You've got violent crime up 49% between 2015 and now. These are shocking stats. They are disturbing. I believe it's crimes with firearms up 116%. Those are not duck hunters and sport shooters, Hal. Those are criminals with guns. And Trudeau has made life more difficult for hunters and sport shooters. He has gotten rid of mandatory minimums for a lot of gun crimes, like selling illegal guns. He's made bail easier to get. He has instituted his hug a thug policies. And now we have numbers to show that this is an utter failure. Will he correct course or will he double down? Well, as we were just talking about with immigration, they keep doubling down and they don't seem to realize when they've made a mistake. They did that small bail reform that we've talked about before. That was 1.5 out of 10 is what Frank Caputo called it, the former prosecutor turned conservative MP from Kamloops. They did the bare minimum, and they only did that because every premier dragged them kicking and screaming there. There needs to be more done. They're probably not going to do it because they think this is the right way to go. This is the progressive way to deal with crime, to let it get worse.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thanks for joining us once again today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.
Albertans should be able to feel safe in their homes and communities, whether they live in a big city or a rural area. But over the last number of years, we've been hearing a lot of complaints about increasing rural crime. However, today's guest has some encouraging news in this area. Joining us is RCMP Superintendent Mike McCauley from the Community Safety and Wellbeing Branch. Welcome to Bridge City News, Mike. Great to have you on today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. Okay, so tell us about the good news here. Apparently, rural crime in most of southern Alberta has actually decreased since 2023.
Yeah, it's I looked at the numbers again. It's funny because in my branch, I'm in charge of crime reduction, and we focus more on offenders. We focus more on the root causes of crime versus the numbers. Of course, the numbers are important. They do tell a story, but there's so little we can control about that. But it is extremely positive to hear that many of the main drivers of crime in rural Alberta and especially in southern Alberta have decreased. Break-in enters are down 18% over the same period of last year. Theft of motor vehicles are down around 22%, and theft of over 5,000 down around 17%. So those are very encouraging numbers.
That is really encouraging. I know, I was looking at some stats as well from what you guys, RCMP, are saying. So from January to March, it looks like compared to the same period last year, there have been even fewer person crime offenses, person against person, I guess that is, 76 less, 213 fewer property crimes, and 373 less total criminal code offenses. And like you said, break-in enters dropped 18.4% in vehicles. So what do you think is leading to this wonderful news that it's we're seeing this significant decrease?
Yeah, so there's a few things I'll speak to. It's to be completely blunt, there's not a lot we can do to control the numbers. There's work we can do to, again, we tackle the root causes of crime, we tackle the root causes of victimization, and I think, and I'll share some of that. And all we can do is do the best we can in those areas and to provide the most programming to help Albertans and to try and counteract this. But I can tell you that in the last 5 years, there's actually been around 33% drop in those key property crime areas in southern Alberta, which is massive. And in 2020, they created the position I'm in now. I wasn't the original member in that position, but they created the crime reduction strategy portion of policing in Alberta, and they really put a focus on rural crime and a focus on tackling those root causes. And we saw a major decrease that first year and a half, and then it leveled off a little bit. And in 2 years ago, we created the Community Safety Wellbeing Branch, which is an even more enhanced, robust strategy when it comes to tackling these issues. And we're starting to see the benefits of that. Mm-hmm. I will give a lot of credit to the frontline members because the hardworking frontline members, if they're not there to do the policing, none of this matters. None of the programming we can create from a headquarters perspective and a strategy perspective works without those hardworking, dedicated frontline members and our community partners that embrace it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, is this the first significant decrease that we've seen in southern Alberta rural crime in several years, or has it been sort of declining for some time now, or do you really attribute it to sort of what you guys are doing, just the difference that's made?
Well, I'd like to take some credit.
Of course.
In the provincial RCMP realm, again, it's been a big focus for the last 5 years, and we have seen the gains in the last 5 years. But it is very promising. These specific stats that brought us here today, it's very promising, and we're going to hopefully continue that trend. The biggest shift we've had, especially in the last, I'll say, year and a half, is again to develop stronger partnerships. We have partnerships with nonprofit agencies. We have partnerships with community groups. We have partnerships with AHS to tackle drug addiction, to tackle mental health, and to really, again, focus on the root causes. Because what we found is that it's all fine. Yes, police have a role to arrest people that commit crimes, and we're happy to do that, and we do it well. But what we've had to shift from, and it is a shift. I would say it's a relatively global shift, is to not just tackle that, but also to walk upstream. So we use the stream analogy. If you picture us, a beautiful stream, and coming down your screen there. At the bottom is where we pick people up and have to arrest them, or perhaps they're in the depths of drug addiction, and that's why they're committing crimes. And often our social services and police and first responders deal with people at their worst at the bottom of that stream. What we've tried to do is, how about we walk upstream and find out why they're falling in and ending up in that sad state of affairs at the end of that cesspool, and try and work on some of those reasons before we get there. And I think there's been some good success.
That sounds really practical too.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. It's when you start doing it, it's like, yeah, of course, I can keep the cycle going and arresting, and the person gets back on the streets. And if we don't give them support and services for, again, addiction is a big driver of crime. If we don't try and partner and find the most, as you said, common sense and realistic solutions for these folks to break that cycle, then we're just going to be keeping the same methods going, and it's probably not going to have any success.
Yeah, revolving door for sure. I would imagine that one of the challenges for policing is the huge geographical areas that RCMP have to cover. And, of course, slow response times sometimes can come along with that. So would more officers obviously would be helpful, right? But that normally isn't it's not usually in the budget, right? For government budget to increase the fleet. So have we seen any increases in the number of officers in rural areas or not?
Yeah, so with in recent years, there's a thing, and I won't bore you with the details, but called the police funding model. So in smaller communities have had to change their funding structure to pay and contribute towards policing. And what that's done is it's given us, an increase in resources. There has been, over the last 4 years, there has been an increase. It's not as simple as putting a police officer in every corner. That just doesn't work, to be honest. It's about coming up with an overall strategy to increase numbers where they are needed 100% in the front lines, but also to come up with supports and different strategies. So I'll give an example is the crime reduction units that exist. So Southern Alberta and every other RCMP district has a crime reduction unit where their focus is on the highest, the criminals that create the most amount of harm for their communities. And having a team like that, what we've found is you take the top, say 10, or in our case, we deal with the top 100 offenders in the province. And of course, there are some in Southern Alberta. If we focus our energy on those folks, it can actually reduce crime a great deal, because it's not just catching someone who's maybe stealing a loaf of bread. It's going and trying to capture and keep in jail those folks that are causing an enormous amount of harm in communities. Our studies have found, and we use the crime severity index as a measuring stick for our top 100 offenders. And yes, there's the violent offenders that might commit one crime, one heinous crime, and that obviously raises their stats. But we have people that commit over and over again robberies and break and enters and domestic violence, and it's a repeat, as you said, like the revolving doors type of system. We're focusing on those folks, in addition to responding to calls and doing other preventive policing. But by focusing on those folks, if we take them off the street and spend some more time building bail packages and building assistance for the Crown to hopefully get those folks held in jail longer and get longer sentencing, then we're actually preventing a lot more crime than we are if we just kind of take a shotgun approach and try and tackle all of the problems that exist.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to like the crime of theft or property theft, are there any specific items that thieves are targeting? Is it mainly machinery and vehicles, or what are you seeing sort of in those rural areas?
I don't know if there's any specific things. What I will say is that vehicles are a huge problem in Alberta, as theft of vehicles. We do a lot of programming. In the wintertime, we do Project Cold Start, which is focusing on fact that people leave their vehicles running and go into stores. But outside of that, and especially in rural communities, folks will leave their keys on their dashboard or leave them under their visor and leave the car unlocked. 50% of vehicles are found to be stolen with the keys in the car. That is a massive number. So yes, most of the time criminals are doing crimes of opportunity. So yes, they'll go onto a rural property and they'll see what's out and about. If there's a shed open, that's where they're going to tackle looking for items, and they'll take whatever's available. So it is about target hardening. It is about taking some extra steps. My uncle has a beautiful ranch in Okotoks in southern Alberta, and we've traveled and visit him often. And I'm always telling him, and I think of him as our other great Albertans down south, is saying, yes, you have a beautiful community here, but people will potentially come and look and see, if your door is locked, or look and see if your vehicles are locked. And if the keys are there, that's what they're going to target. If not, they'll move on to the next property. So there's a lot of steps we can take to try and prevent that.
Definitely. I think rural residents probably don't have that tendency to lock up things as diligently as city dwellers do they?
Yeah, 100%. And I love that about rural Alberta and rural Canada. Canada is a safe place. Let's be very honest about this. It's a safe place. However, there's going to be people that'll disrupt that peace, and small steps like locking your doors at night, closing your garage, locking up your sheds, that does do a massive amount of prevention when it comes to rural crime.
And I understand that roughly half of rural crimes happen between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., right? So can you maybe tell us about something called the 9 p.m. routine?
Yeah, so a 9 p.m. routine, and I'll refer back to my uncle. When we go to visit him with my kids, we go and do chores. The rural crime chore or rural property chores that you have to do, whether it's feeding animals, whether it's just taking care of the property. My suggestion to all rural Albertans and all Albertans, to be honest, is at that time when you're doing your nightly chores, do those extra steps. Like make sure that you leave lights on in strategic areas that you typically do. Make sure you lock up the barn if you have expensive equipment in there. Lock your vehicles up. If you have surveillance cameras, make sure that they're turned on and they're active and working. Close your doors. Do those little things. If you drive by your neighbor's house, in the middle of the night and you see that their garage is open, make a quick phone call and get them to close it. Right. All of those little steps truly will make neighborhoods safer, and you'll be less likely to be victimized.
Yeah, that kind of comes back to that rural crime watch, almost like the neighborhood watch, right?
Yep, 100%. And you bring up a great partner of ours. The Rural Crime Watch is a great partner. We have Citizens on Patrol as partners. All of these things, I call them force multipliers. Police can't be on every corner, as we've said. So if you have the more eyes and ears that are out there is absolutely to our benefit. And it prevents crime, but it can provide intelligence. So we truly encourage every Albertan, if you see something even remotely suspicious, call us, please. Maybe it's nothing this time, but maybe it will lead us to understanding more trends and more patterns, and allow us to better serve the communities and better prevent crime.
Now, over the years, of course, there's been a lot of debate and controversy over what rural property owners can and can't do to protect themselves. So what are the rules, especially when it comes to using, say, firearms or some other kind of force to protect your own home?
So I'll be completely frank. I get this question a lot, and I'm not going to get into the specific rules and intricacies. Every situation is different, but I will give advice. I'm good at giving advice. My advice is 100%, and you bring up a good point for firearms. When we talk about the 9 o'clock rule, we talk about target hardening. I'm actually in the middle of starting a program that's going to be coming through in the near future about like an education program on firearms. We understand Albertans have a right to firearms, and we don't want to get in the way of that. But we do ask Albertans to lock those up. Unfortunately, there's a lot of crime guns that are stolen from good, hardworking rural Albertans that have guns for proper purposes, but they get stolen because they don't necessarily lock them up properly. So that is an item that is important. Now, getting back to your question, because I'm not dodging your question, my advice is this: there's nothing on your property that's worth yourself or your family members getting hurt for. There's just not. So, if you have an option to flee, if you have an option to get out of any situation, whether that's on a rural property, whether that's on a city property, whether that's in a storefront where you are observing crime, leave the crime fighting to the professionals. We're trained. We have proper tools. And that's just that. At the end of the day, I can't get into specifics. There's so much nuance to what could get you in trouble or not get in trouble. But I'll say there's very few chances that you won't have to escape. And the fight or flight, when it comes to a criminal on your property, it should be flight. You should be trying to get out of there with your family and loved ones as safely as possible, and avoid any confrontation with any people that are on your property for legal purposes.
All right. Well, great advice there. Thanks so much for being with us today, Mike. Looks like we're out of time, but appreciate having you on today.
Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Mike McCauley is the superintendent with the Alberta RCMP Community Safety and Wellbeing Branch. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.